All right, let's just get right to it. The big question on everyone's mind. What exactly is Mpox? We are going to break it all down. The science, the symptoms, and the story behind why it suddenly became such a big deal.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we've got to start with the basics. We're going to look at what this virus actually is, where it comes from, and the fact that it's actually been around for a while.
So, at its most basic level, Mpox is a viral disease. It's actually in the same family as the smallpox virus, which is a name we all know, and that's why you often hear them talked about together. But here's the most important part. Mpox is generally way less severe. It's also what's called zoonotic, which, is really just a fancy way of saying it originally spread from animals to people. But here's something that's super important to understand. Not all Mpox is created equal. The virus actually has two main genetic versions, or clades. Clade I, which is from the Congo Basin, has historically been the more severe one. The one that was behind the recent global outbreaks, that's Clade II, which, thankfully, is the milder of the two. And knowing this difference, it's absolutely key to understanding the risk and the public health response.
And even though this felt like it came out of nowhere for most of us, Mpox has actually been on the scientific radar for more than 60 years. It was first spotted in lab monkeys way back in 1958, and the first human case was recorded in 1970. For decades, it was pretty much contained to certain regions in Africa. But the real game changer was in the 2020s, when it suddenly started spreading in a new way between people in countries that had pretty much never seen it before.
All right, so that's the history lesson. Now let's get into the stuff you really need to know, the practical details. How does this virus actually spread, and what are the symptoms you should be looking for? This is the kind of information that helps keep you safe.
So, how does it actually spread? If there's one phrase to remember, it's close contact. Seriously, this isn't something you're going to catch just walking past someone in the grocery store. It's spread through direct skin-to-skin contact with the rash or scabs, through body fluids, or through being face-to-face for a long time. And yet, it can also linger on things like bedding or clothing.
And this right here, this is probably one of the biggest myths we need to bust. I mean, after COVID-19, we're all hyper-aware of airborne stuff, right? Well, Mpox is a different beast. It is not considered airborne. It really needs that close, often physical and sustained contact to get from one person to another.
Okay, so let's say someone is exposed. At first, it can feel a whole lot like you're coming down with the flu. Fever, headache, just feeling really wiped out. But here's the telltale sign, the one thing that really stands out: swollen lymph nodes. That's often the clue that tells doctors, this might be Mpox and not something else.
So after you get through that initial flu-like phase, that's when the classic rash shows up. And it goes through these really specific stages. It starts out as flat little spots, then those spots turn into raised bumps. After that, they fill up with fluid, first clear, then kind of cloudy, before they finally crust over, form scabs, and eventually fall off. Understanding this whole progression is really important for doctors and for knowing when someone's not contagious anymore.
And here's some good news, something that's really reassuring. For the vast majority of people, the whole thing runs its course in about 2 to 4 weeks, and they make a full recovery. So yeah, it's definitely not a pleasant experience, but most cases do resolve on their own without any major long-term issues. Okay, so what do you actually do if you see these symptoms and you're worried? Let's walk through the playbook, from getting a diagnosis to what the treatment actually looks like. The game plan here is super simple and direct. 3 steps. First, get in touch with a doctor or a clinic. They'll know exactly what to do. Second, they'll likely do a PCR test, which involves taking a little swab from one of the lesions. It's very accurate. And third, while you're waiting for those results, and definitely if you test positive, it is so important to isolate to protect the people around you. When it comes to treatment, for most folks, it's really all about just managing the symptoms. We call this supportive care. So, things like staying hydrated and managing any pain or fever. Now, for more severe cases or for people who are at higher risk of complications, there are antiviral drugs that can help, but really, the most critical part of this whole process is isolation. You've got to stay isolated until every last scab has fallen off and a fresh layer of skin has formed underneath.
So we've covered what to do if you get it, but what about not getting it in the first place? That's the best strategy of all, right? Let's talk prevention.
Look, the prevention steps are pretty much common sense, and they line up exactly with how the virus spreads. First, avoid that close skin-to-skin contact with anyone who has a rash that looks like Mpox. Second, don't share personal stuff like towels, bedding, or clothes. And third, something we all got really good at recently, good hand hygiene. It's still one of our best defenses. And
we have another really powerful tool in the toolbox: vaccines. Because Mpox and smallpox are basically cousins, the vaccines we already have for smallpox work really well against Mpox too. These aren't for everybody, but they're typically offered to people who might be at a higher risk or who've recently been exposed to the virus.
Okay, let's pull the camera back a bit, because an outbreak isn't just about the virus itself. It's also about how we, as a society, talk about it and respond to it, and that is just as important as any medicine.
And this is where things get really, really important, and it goes way beyond just the science. Whenever an illness gets linked to a specific group of people, stigma can spread even faster than the virus. And that kind of language is dangerous. It makes people afraid to get tested, afraid to get help, and that puts everyone at risk. So, using accurate, non-judgmental, science-based language, it's not just a nice thing to do, it is an absolute public health necessity.
All right, to wrap things up, let's do a quick fire round on a couple of the biggest questions people always ask. First up, and this is the big one, is Mpox fatal? The short answer is no. For the vast majority of people, it's not. Fatalities can happen, but they are very rare, especially with that milder clade 2 virus that's been circulating. It really depends on things like a person's overall health and, crucially, whether they have access to good health care.
Okay, next question. This is another one we hear all the time. Can you just take an antibiotic for it?
And the answer to that is a hard no. It's a really common mix-up, but antibiotics are designed to kill bacteria. Mpox is a virus. It's like trying to use a key for the wrong lock. They just don't work on viruses. That's why we use antiviral drugs when a treatment is needed.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, every outbreak, whether it's Mpox or something we haven't even heard of yet, is a test. It's a test of our science, for sure, our ability to track diseases, create vaccines, and develop treatments. But maybe even more than that, it's a test of our humanity, a test of our ability to communicate clearly, to fight back against stigma, and to act with empathy. And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. How will we use the lessons we've learned this time to do even better when the next one comes around?